Hi and welcome to another gaming video, and in today's video I am going to be taking this Game Boy apart and giving it a bit of a clean. I picked it up recently and as you can see it's a bit of a funny brown colour. There's lots of grime just about everywhere and it needs a good old clean. I did reach out to the seller that I bought it from, and apparently it was in his mum's loft for 12 years, so that might explain some of the condition. It came without a battery back, and so I just bought one, and as you can see it's it's not the colour it should be. I don't expect to be able to get it back to its full colour, but a good cleanup will do. If I really was that bothered, I would go down the retro bright route and put it in a UV or in a box with UV light and try and get it done that way. But I just want to give it a clean and get some of this grime off, and it might shift some of the colour. So let's take the batteries out. And it does work, as you've seen in the previous video, but it does need a little bit of work. It needs the screen lens put back on. So you'll need a Phillips screwdriver and a tri-wing. I think most Nintendo devices have tri-wings, and there should be 6 screws to take the back off. So there's 2 inside the battery compartment, and I am hazarding a guess that this has never been opened. It does have a weird rattle on the inside, which we may get to the bottom of. So you can see even the screws have got some gunk all over them. What I will be doing is taking it apart, putting all the plastic parts in a... Ew, you can see the grime on the end of that screw. I don't know if you can. I'll put in the plastic parts in a bucket of soapy water and giving them a good clean. Probably let them soak for a little while. I think the back should just come off once these are undone. But there is an awful lot of grime. Now you'd have to be careful not to pull up too quickly, because there is a ribbon cable attached to the top screen. Right, so if we flip it over, oh, there's another screw and another one. So the ribbon cable is here, and it's not got no clips, so all you do is you pull gently on this cable and release it. That's the top half taken out, and that is all the screws there. And so if we look over the board itself, looks pretty okay. There's a bit of gunk just about there, but considering this is a 30-year-old console and, well, the outside of it looks pretty grim, the inside looks alright. So the next thing we do, and it's Phillips screwdriver by the looks of it, so these are case screws. It's always wise to keep your screws separate. You've got a board here, which is your headphone jack, and that's got 2 little screws in. Now they're looking a bit closer at these boards. They do look a bit grubby, but nothing that a clean over with some isopropyl would help, or wouldn't help. Then you've got 2 screws holding the back in. Now these are gold screws, they all look the same, so that's quite handy. So that should lift off there, and the board should come out fairly easily. There we go. So these are the boards. I did say that there was a rattling noise inside the case, and it looks like the old battery door clip had broken and gone inside, so that's explained what the rattling was. Looking over the board, there's a bit of gunk. It's very grimy in places, but in general it looks pretty good. So all of these switches and buttons I will clean over with some isopropyl before they'll go back. Yeah, it's a bit yuck inside there. So we take the power switch out, or the power button out, and then we've got this metal shield, which is another 4 little screws. For anyone who hasn't opened up a games console or a handheld console, the Game Boy is the easiest one to start with. It's not very fiddly, there's just a lot of screws to go in it. And as long as you remember which screws go where, you'll be absolutely fine. So this is the last screw for the shield. That will just lift off. That'll need a good clean. The whole thing will just need a good clean inside there. So we'll put that aside and we turn our attention to the front board. Now there's more screws in this, and I can see quite a bit of dirt, possibly a little bit of corrosion around there. I think once again all the screws will be the same. So yeah, so the screws that are actually looking at it, they're all the same. So it's just the case screws that look different. Very handy. I've taken other consoles apart and they can use like 10 different types of screws, different lengths, and it gets confusing. So like I said, the Game Boy is probably the easiest console to take apart. The front board has a lot more screws in. Yeah, there's loads. And then we get to see how much grime is underneath the top bit. I'm undoing these screws and I'm feeling the grittiness of what is coming out on my fingers. So we've got 2 more screws, I think. Oh no, 3 more. See that center one, which I'm now about to undo. This one, you can see there's lots of grime, perhaps a bit of corrosion there, and the screw head is slightly got some nastiness on the top of that. And if you can see that one very well, but there's some rubbish on the top of that. But they're all the same screws and all clean up. So that is the front PCB board, which should lift. Now you've got to be very careful not to damage anything, and it has been in there for a while, so it's quite possible. I don't know if you have to sort of just twist the casing. So I don't want to damage the screen, but it should lift off. I can't see any more screws in there, so that board should lift off. If I just grab maybe a knife and try and lift that up. Here we go. So it's probably just a bit stuck in there. Yeah, the screen has come up with it. So there we go. That is the front of it, and as you can see, look at that. That is rather minging. That is really not nice. The speaker is absolutely filthy. This rubber is awful. So we'll put that aside. The board itself and the screen itself looks okay. I mean, I have no idea what that is, but it's coming out. So yeah, the screen looks fine. Obviously you give that a good clean before you put it back in, but the board, apart from this little bit here, which probably just needs a bit of isopropyl on that to clean that up. And we now look at the buttons. As you can see underneath the screen, it's really grimy. Probably some of the most awful buttons I've seen, and I need to be careful what I say because well, it's going to happen. It's a 30-year-old console which looks like it's been well used and then put in a, well, I was told it was put in a loft for 12 years, so that is awful. but nothing that a cleanup wouldn't sort out, and that will be the next thing. So let me go and grab a tub of water and get these plastics cleaned off. So here we go. I've got a nice bucket of soapy water here, warm, just a bit of washing up liquid in, and we move the panels out of the way, the PCBs, etc., so we don't get them wet. And grab a toothbrush. And it's always great to clean with a toothbrush, and pop these in the water. So get your power button, that can go in, all your D-pad buttons and your button membranes, they can all go in. Give them a good soak. The one thing I forgot to take out of the casing here is the battery contacts. Don't particularly want to get them wet, so they need to come out. And as I've had some battery issues with this Game Boy, I would like to give them a clean. They should just pop out. There's a couple of clips that hold them in. They can be a bit tricky, especially if they're quite corroded, as this one seems to be. Having a bit of an issue getting those out. There's a little tab here that you press in, but you've got to press it in, and oh, here we go. So that one's out, and as you can see, yes, there's a bit of corrosion on those. I don't intend on replacing them, just cleaning them up. I said before, I think in a previous video, this is a complete, I want to keep this original, obviously apart from the back, which I think is a third-party battery cover. So there's two little tabs here, and I push that, you push it in, so it, there we go. So that's another one out, and you can see they are quite corroded in places. Probably a bit of battery acid on there. And we get the final one out. Alright. Oh, now I've dropped that in the water. There we go. Probably not a bad idea just to give them a quick wash, to be fair. Get some of that grime off them. But I don't want to leave them in the water too long. So we can then pop this back in there. I'm also going to pop the screen lens in because I want to try and get some of this glue off so I can apply some fresh glue. And really that is about it. Oh no, we've got the battery shield, or the cartridge shield, which looks like it's got a bit of, oh, that's just washing off, look, you can see that. Some grime on there. Grab a tea towel. So we can put these somewhere when they're dried, or while they're drying, and really just give the whole thing a good clean. You've got to remember, this is probably 30 years of grime and horrible stuff on there, but they do clean up very well. Take something like these buttons, and they don't take very long to clean up at all. You'll be very careful because these are quite fragile, especially these. This is the start and select buttons, so they can split and perish in places. But we just want to get as much of this grime and whatnot off them. It's not generally the buttons that are too hard to clean, but you can see, I don't know if you can see that in the bottom there's bits of all sorts floating around in the bottom of this already, and they come up really nice. Look, there's one side that I've done, and this side I haven't done yet, but it'll just clean straight off. This is the D-pad, which was really quite disgusting. The person that I bought this from is quite intrigued for the cleanup, so hopefully he won't take too much of an offence at me calling it grubby, but it is, and it's one of those things you have with older consoles. especially one that's been stored in a loft. And I think he was just glad that it was going to someone who was going to look after it and give it a good clean up. So now we get to the main bodies of the consoles, which is the bits that are the worst. But you can see the grime is already coming off. It is restoring some of that greyness. Not sure how clean we're going to get this. It almost looks like it's sort of tobacco stained. That nicotine yellowness you get. It's definitely, as you can see there, this is what sort of colour it kind of should be, and then there's a line across the top which matches the rest of the colour. It's very grim, very grey. But nothing to clean up and fix. Maybe for the plastic casing itself. A scouring sponge would do. It would get in there and clean up a lot of this. I did take some pictures of the before, so we'll be able to see just how clean this comes up. I mean, it's not going to match that, which matches the inside. But as far as griminess goes and all the, I'm assuming, hand sweat and maybe bits of food that have been stuck on over the years, I think that's as clean as we're going to get that bit. I'm just keen to get rid of this sort of brown gunk, basically. Right, that's the back of that. Let's have a look at the front. So give that a good scrub, especially in here. You'll be able to see instantly what a difference that makes. There you go. Give that all a good scrub. I don't know what that is, but there's a little mark there, maybe pen or something. Try and get some of this glue off. So I might need to remove that with something else. Get in all the grooves on the casing. And then do the same on the inside. It's the inside which gets grubbiest the most, because it all gets trapped in there, I suppose. Nowhere to escape. It's coming up pretty well. That speaker grill cleaned out. Give it a good clean over with, oh look, that mark's come off. There we go. Okay, so give that hole a good scrubbing over. Like I said, try and get rid of some of this glue that's on the screen top. And I think that is going to be about it. And I was kind of hoping that the the colouring would come out a bit more, so we get more of this colour. But it's 30 years of use and sitting in a loft that's done it. As you can see from the watercolour and all the bits floating around in it, that was pretty grim. So we'll put that aside with the other pieces, and then we'll turn our attention to the board. So when it comes to the boards, be very careful obviously, and I am going to just give these a good clean over with some rubbing alcohol or isopropyl IPA. As high a percentage as you can get is great. This has got 99.9%. And we take a toothbrush, you can see the same toothbrush, and just go over the whole board gently. It will lift any dirt that's on there. And with isopropyl, it evaporates, although I won't be putting this straight back together. Every little thing that you can clean up will do good. So all the ports, let's give them a good wipe over. It's a good idea to just try and drip a few drops in the switches themselves, just freeze them up a little bit. Go over the whole board, gets rid of any dirt and grime that's been built up, and gives the whole thing a nice fresh feel. You've got your cart port there, which is a good thing because that really does get grimy in there. Your power switch at the top, now this is a good one to clean. Just drop a few drops in there and give it a clean. And the same with the other boards, so just be very careful, give them a good clean, removes any grime that's floating around in there. Right, so you've got your battery contacts which are on the board, so they could do with a good clean up. Get rid of any corrosion that's on them. Okay, and put that to the side. Then we've got the board with the screen and the speaker on, so we do the same to that. This one looks pretty clean, to be fair, which is surprising, considering the state of the other board. The speaker, now that was really grim, there's lots of grubber on there, so we'll give that a good clean. So it doesn't take a lot, and you can get it up nice and clean. Do the same to the other side of the board. Be careful of the ribbon connector there. Like I said, there's a bit of, I'm not sure what that is there, but it can have a good clean. Got a contrast wheel here, which really could do with some drops dripped down it. Make sure it's cleaned up nicely. Go over everything. Get rid of 30 years of grime. And there's some grubbiness on the under this side of this cable. I do apologise if you can hear some loudness in the background. I've got builders that have just sort of turned up outside and started digging the pavement. And there we go. That is the board cleaned up. Give the screen a little going over, but be very careful. Make sure all the contacts are nice and clean. And that is that. The other thing to clean up is the battery contacts. So we'll give them a good clean and get off some of that corrosion, etc. This is not a full restoration. This is taking it apart, cleaning up what needs to be cleaned just to make sure that it lasts a little bit longer. I mean, it's lasted 30 years in this kind of state, so that's alright. If you've got a bit of heavy corrosion, you could try and just sort of scrape it off and then clean that off with some IPA again. And do the last one. IPA is wonderful stuff, it really is. It's amazing for electronics, and if you get the highest sort of percentage you can get, it really does evaporate quite quickly. There's quite a bit of corrosion or grime, I'm not sure which it is, on this battery contact, so we'll get as much of it off as we can. I mean, the unit did work, so it's not causing too much of an issue. Just try and get as much of that off. Be careful with these, because if you damage the springs, then you need to buy some new contacts, and I don't want to buy anything new for this except the battery back, which I bought because it was missing one. So that we go. That is clean the board up with some isopropyl, 99%, 99.9%. It's also called rubbing alcohol, depending on where you buy it. And that is it. That is all cleaned. Now the boards will sit to dry, and I will come back and put this together once I have dried up the plastics. And it's not advisable to put it back together straight away. Give it a clean, rub it over with a towel, maybe sit it somewhere so that there's no water residue anywhere, because water and electronics do not mix. But give the whole thing a good dry. You can even hair dryer it to get in all the nooks and crannies. That's a quick dry of that. So you just dry it all over. I did take some pictures of this before I cleaned it, so hopefully we can see a big difference. Yeah, like I said earlier, it hasn't shifted much of the grim colour, so I'm going to be stuck with a slightly brown Game Boy, but it is fantastic. So I will carry on drying these buttons and giving them a good dry. Like I said, either leave them somewhere warm in an airing cupboard, or maybe a bit of a hair dryer to get all of the water out, because there's lots of sort of nooks and crannies in here that you can still see there's bits of water in. So make sure it is well and truly dry, and then we will start rebuilding it. So now I've left the whole thing for about 2 hours to make sure it was fully dry, and I'm now going to put it back together. So the first thing we need to do is take the front casing and pop in the buttons and the membranes. So this is the start and select buttons. They should only go in a certain way. So there's that one. And the A and B buttons, which they look like they've got little sticks on, so they will only go in a certain way, that one. Yeah. And the membranes to go on those. And then you've got your D-pad, which doesn't look like it goes any particular way, so that can go in there. And your membrane. The power button goes in the back casing. So we take the screen and speaker motherboard and lay that in. So that should be fine. It just goes in there like so. Speaker fits in its own little casing, just tucks underneath the board there. And we use the gold screws to put it back together. So as we found out earlier, there are only 2 different sets of screws for the internals. So we pop all them back in. Yeah, there was a lot of screws. So before we put it all together, just make sure, yeah, all the buttons seem to make contact with what they should do. This is probably the longest process, I think. It's just popping all these screws in the front case. As we found out earlier, there are only two types of screw. So you've got the Phillips screw, which are, most of them I think are goldy coloured, yeah. And they all go on the inside. And then you've got your tri-wings, which you use for the back casing. So I know a lot of people speed through putting screws in, but I don't have that facility. So we just pop those in there. Make sure they're nice and tight, but not too tight. They are going into plastic. So like I said earlier, it is probably, if you're starting out doing consoles, then the Game Boy is probably the easiest one. We've got one final screw here, and that is the front put together. So just double check all your buttons work. Right, so put that to the side, and then we put the what we need back in the back. So we'll start with the battery contacts. So you've got two that are that shape, and then one where the notch is here instead of up here. So there's two on the bottom and one on the top. So I'm assuming this one is the top one. So the battery contacts go in, and there's this little tab that you had to press in to get out. So they need to go in that way. So it goes in and just clicks down, and you'll see the tab in there clip in. So we do the same for the other one. So that one goes in there, and that clips in, there we go. And then you've got a battery contact on the top, which goes in, my mistake, the battery contact goes in and clips in there. If they don't clip in, maybe you've pressed the tab in too much, so you can just bend that back a little bit so that the tab will fit in snugly. There we go. So that is the battery back put on, or the battery contacts put on, sorry. Then the next piece is the shield. So it's 4 screws that go in the shield. So we grab 4 of those and pop that in. So they go in there. Just make sure that you, like I said, you don't tighten the screws up too much. But these are fairly hardy consoles. At 30 odd years old, they still have good solid plastics. I was working recently on an original DS, and the plastics on them is so fragile. They just break constantly. Okay, and put the last one in. Okay, then pop your power switch in, which is in the top. Only goes in one way. There we go. And take your bottom board and flip it over so the screen is face down, and that board sits just in there, and that sits like that. Everything else should just fall into place. You just have to make sure that the power switch is in the right place, so that the button on the board itself lines up with the switch there, otherwise you could end up breaking it. And there we go, that is that. So we screw in the headphone board, which sits on those little, there's sort of 2 little lugs there, that sits on there, and screw that in. The board underneath that just sits in place. So that goes there, be careful with it. And then you've got two more screws that hold in on the top. No, they don't. Got two more screws that hold in down here. These top screws are what the case go through. So we pop that down there, and this one, and then we get to what I would class as probably the trickiest part of this whole teardown, and that is popping the LCD ribbon cable back in. So we take your front half, and it's got no sliders or connectors on the side, no barbs, whatever you want to call them. It purely is just a push-in connector, and it pushes into that connector there, which is why you can't pull it apart straight away. So there's a bit of flexibility. It's quite a thick cable, so you just line it up and pop it in. Be very careful because it is a thick cable, but it's still a cable, and it just pushes in. Can be a bit tricky, but there's quite a lot of room inside this console, which is quite nice. So I can't seem to get that second corner in. Okay, there we go. So as far as I tell, it just pushes in. I can't remember exactly how far it pushes in, but it doesn't seem to want to go any further. So that is that. You then pop the whole thing back together. Oh, there we go. And you pop your 6 screws in. Now these are tri-wing screws, and they go in those 6 holes there, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 2 in the battery compartment. So we just tighten them down. Like I say, it's a very forgiving console. It's quite easy to take apart, and there's a lot of space in there. It's not too fiddly at all. Finish putting in the screws. And then I've got 2 in the battery compartment. And I am hoping that I have not made this very long video for nothing. So the only thing left to do is this final screw. And there we have it, it's all back together. Pop some batteries in. Hopefully I have got the contacts in the right place, and they are all where they should be. Pop your battery back on. This is the new one I bought, so obviously it's a slightly different colour, kind of matches the top there. And oh dear, then we don't have anything. Okay, so it looks as if maybe the issue that I was having before is possibly a battery contact problem, because this one just pops straight out. I don't think it should. Maybe we need to just bend that little piece out so that it holds it in a bit better, because this one doesn't want to come out, and neither does this one. So I think some of the problem is these maybe springs are not where they should be, so you can just get a screwdriver and pull them out a bit. Do not pull them too hard, or you will lose the spring altogether. Just make sure they're nice and pulled out. This one looks a bit squashed, so it could be causing a loose contact. Let's try that. So there's definitely a loose contact somewhere. It is definitely a battery contact issue. Which is a little disappointing. But maybe... oh. Which it doesn't seem to be doing now. So we popped some fresh batteries in here and made sure the contacts are all neat and tidy, and it seems to be working absolutely fine, even if you move the batteries around. So there was a loose contact. I think maybe pulling the springs out a little bit has helped, or maybe it's just made the pressure on the battery contacts a bit more, so that's pretty good. I'm now going to put a game in this. So we take a copy of Tetris. This one came with it. Let's pop the battery back on. Keep that all nice and tidy. As you can see, the brownness hasn't really come up, but it is a lot cleaner. There's no grime and whatnot ever. Everything works fine. The screen is lovely. So if we just test out, that's the contrast wheel. That moves nice. The volume seems a lot smoother, and actually the volume seems quite a bit louder. So I'm thinking that maybe all that grime in there, as you can see, it's all nice and clean in there now, is good. The only thing I have left to do is to put the screen lens back on, and you may have noticed that there is a bit of grey missing. I got a bit vigorous when I was taking the old glue off. Didn't realise that scrubbing this would take the paint off, so it's a little transparent, so you can see. So glue, it's not the most ideal situation. Really you should buy a new screen lens, but if we just put a little bit on here, it will keep that in place. Now I don't want to get any on the underneath of the screen because I am gluing it down. It's not going to come off, so use something like a glue spreader or an old brush just to make sure that's nice and thin and not too close to the screen, otherwise you'll end up with a glue blob near the screen, and that's annoying. I've done that once before on a console. I think it was a DS. So just dab some glue on the underside of that. Make sure that the lens or the screen itself is nice and clean, and that the screen lens is nice and clean. This one is pretty scratched in the first place, so it's not going to make too much of a difference. And pop it in. Stick it down, and you have a replacement screen lens. Now I've got a little bit of glue on my fingers, which is on the lens there, but other than that, that is a very dirty Game Boy with a missing back and a screen lens that kept coming off or was loose when I got it, and a little bit of iffy battery problems. Taken it apart, given it a good clean, got all of the grime out of it, and found out why it was rattling, because it had this old door catch inside it. So no rattle now. And there we go. That is a restored as much as I can restore. Like I said, I bought nothing new for it. I wasn't going to buy a new screen lens. The only thing I bought new was the battery back, because it didn't have one. There we go. That is the final result of me stripping it down, scrubbing it, cleaning it. I didn't want to retro bright it to get rid of this yellowness. It would have been an added expense that I didn't want. And that is me with a restored, all the buttons are buttery smooth. It is a great restoration. I've got a little bit of screen, a little bit of glue on the screen which I need to clean up, but it's not going to fall out. I use a tiny little bit of aquarium glue because it's strong and it doesn't leave. It goes quite flat, so there's no lip on that at all. And there you go. That is me restoring a Game Boy to make it usable. I'm not saying it is the best restoration, because there is so much more I could have done to it to make it its former glory, but it's working and it is great. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed this rather long video, and you can, if you've got a Game Boy that's been sitting around for a long time, it's very easy to open up, clean up and put back together. Link, like, subscribe, enjoy.